Alright guys, good day and welcome to my SQL Server tutorial, and this is the part 2 of this tutorial series. My name is Okafo Chibukim and I'll be your instructor in this tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to discuss on how to create, alter, how to drop a database. So we're going to do this using the SQL Server Management Studio. So let's move to the next slide. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that most of the things we do in SQL Management Studio can be done in two ways. It can be done graphically using the SQL Management Studio, and also it can be done using a query. So in this tutorial, we are going to see how to create a database using the graphical method and also using a query to do that. So let's dive right into the SQL Server Management Studio and then let's create a database. Now, this is the SQL Server Management Studio, and in order for us to create a database graphically, we'll click on the database folder. Let's just drop down to see the databases you have. These are databases that have been created before. So now I'm going to create a new database. To do that graphically, I'm going to right click on the database folder and I'll click on new database. So when the dialog window appears, all I need to do is to put the database name. So I will type my database name. I will name this test1 and I'll click on OK. Now if you look at the Object Explorer window, you will see that test1 has been created. And one thing you need to know is that a database is also an object of any database, just like you have the table, view, and other things. Database is also an object. So that is how we create a database graphically. Now let's see how we create a database using a query. Use an SQL command to create this database, and that command is the create database and the database name. It's quite straightforward. So let's do that using a query. Now right into my SQL Management Studio, or click on new query to open a new query window. Now once this new query window opens, for us to create a database, where I will type create database, then the database name, I will name this test2. So that's all we need to create a database. So I'll select this and click on execute. So from my message here now, we can see that it's telling me command completed successfully. So you may not see the database created here. So for us to see that now, I'll just right click on this and refresh this folder to see that there's two database being created. So that is how we create a database using query. We use the create command, create database, the database name. We can use the create command to do so many things like create table and the table name, but we will come back to that in another lesson. In this tutorial, we just want to see how to create a database, how to alter and to drop a database using a graphical method and also using query. That is how we create a database using the query. I'll put that back for reference purpose. So next we are going to see how we can alter a database by renaming the database. But first, before we move over to that, there's something I need you to know about a database. Now, when we create a database, there are two files that are auto-generated when you create a database. The files are the MDF file and the LDF file. The MDF file contains the actual data, which is the main data that contains the data in the database, while the LDF file is the transaction log file that is used to recover our database. Let's jump into SQL Server Management Studio and see what I mean. For me to see that, I will right click on any of these databases that was newly created, and I'll click on Properties. Now when I click on the property, I'll click on File. So with this, I can now see the location of my LDF and MDF file. Let me just copy this link and I'll run just to see the location of this file. I'll say okay, it needs permission. So now if we look at this file, we see test1 is a .mdf file, and test1 log file. We see test2 and the test2 log file as well. So when we create a database, these files are automatically generated. Now let's see an example again of what I'm talking about this file. Let's create another database called test3. I will execute. Database has been created. I'll refresh. I'll see that test3 database has been created. So now let's jump right into the folder. We'll now see that the test3.mdf file and the LDF file has been created. So also when you drop a database, these files will be deleted as well. Just need to have this in mind. Most of the system database, you can also see their LDF and their MDF files as well. So these are the two files that are auto-generated when you create a new database. So now let's see how we can alter a database by renaming this database, or how we can also do this graphically, and also we can do this with a query. Now let's see how to do this graphically. I'll close this window. Now for me to rename this database, assuming I want to rename this test3 database graphically, is simple and very straightforward. I'll right click on this and I'll click on rename. Then I'm going to name this test5, and I'll click in this window or anywhere in the window for that to take effect. So we see now this database is now test5. Now to do that using a query, we will use the alter database command. We will use alter database name, modify name, and then the new database. Let's see how we can do that using a query. Now in the query window, for me to let's rename this test1 to test6. For me to do that, I will type alter database and I'll put the database test1. Oh, that is correct. Test1, then modify name equal to the new name. I'll name this test6. So let's select and execute. Now database name, if you see my message here, you see the database name test6 has been set. Now for us to see the effect, I will refresh the database folder for you to see that the database one has been changed to test6. Another thing we can do, we can use a stored procedure to change the database name. A stored procedure is like a pre-written code that we can reuse. We have two types of stored procedure. We have the system stored procedure, and we have the user-defined stored procedure, and we will discuss more about stored procedure in a later lesson. But let's just see how to rename this using a stored procedure. The stored procedure that we are going to use is the sp_renamedb, and this is the syntax. We use the execute command, and then we put in the stored procedure sp_renamedb, the old DB name, and the new DB name. So now let's go into SQL Server Management Studio and see how we can rename this test2 database to test7. Now for us to do that, I will type execute. Sorry about that. Execute. Um, the stored procedure is sp_renamedb, the old database name, which is we are renaming test2, then comma, the new database name, we're changing it to test8. So I will select this and I will execute the query. We see that the test6db name has been changed to this test8. So now for us to see that in action, let's refresh the database folder. We see the test2 has been renamed to test8. So this is how to do this using a stored procedure. So now let's jump right into our next slide, and we'll see what we'll have next. So now the next thing we have to do here is dropping a database. And what dropping a database literally means is deleting the database. Now the syntax to do that, remember, we can also do that graphically, or we can do that using a query. Now the syntax to do that using a query, just drop database, the database name. It's straightforward and simple. So one thing to note is that when dropping a database, we are deleting both the LDF file and the MDF file. And also note that we cannot drop a database when the database is in use, or when an application is using the database. In order for us to do that, we have to put the database in a single user mode for us to delete it. I will use a diagram to explain what I mean when the database is in use. Now, I'll open this slide below. Just hold on, my slide is loading. Um, okay, so while we wait, let's see. Alright, so we'll just move ahead while the image is loading. So remember, like as I said, we cannot drop a database when the database is currently in use by another user. So let's see how we can drop a database graphically and using query as well. Let's jump into SQL Server Management Studio. Now, to drop this test5 database graphically is simple. You just right click on the database you want to delete and click on delete. Now you click on close existing connection. This means if a user is currently using it, it will terminate that connection and delete the database. Let's delete this now and wait for it. Now you see that the test5 database is gone. So this is how we delete a database graphically using the SQL Server Management Studio. So now let's see how we can delete that using a query. For us to do that, we use the drop database name. That is the syntax as I showed you in my slide. Drop database name. Now let's dive right into SQL Server Management Studio and see how we can drop a database. So we are going to drop the test6 database with a query. For us to do that, now we'll type drop database, then we'll type the database name test6. So I'll select this and execute. Now it's saying test6 is currently in use. Now that is because We are currently using test 6 here. That was what I told you initially, that we cannot delete a database when it's currently in use. Now for us to put this in another database so that we can delete this database, uh, I'm going to select another database from the drop down list here. Sorry, my management studio is freezing. That is just the example I told you initially for us to delete a database. Alright, so okay, few minutes for me to remove this so that we can delete it. Okay, let's delete the test 8 database. Drop database test 8 and I'll click on execute. You see that database has been deleted successfully. So it's still here, but for me to, once we refresh this, you notice that the test 8 database is no longer there. So that is how we delete a database using a query. So this is what we have for deleting, dropping, and altering a database. So we'll end this part of this tutorial here. We'll continue in the next part, in part 3. Please don't forget to subscribe, like my channel, and also click the bell icon so that you get notified when we upload a new video. Thank you for watching.